Hey everyone, have you ever wondered if there's a right age to start a family?
It's a question almost everyone asks themselves at some point.
You've asked us to dive deep into it, and luckily we've got a great jumping off point with episode 1.
Timing parenthood.
Yeah, from the podcast, The Perfect Age to Start a Family. So get ready to explore all those factors that play a role,
The arguments.
even cultural influences.
What's fascinating about this question is that it's not just about biology.
Yeah.
It's about a whole bunch of things that kind of get woven together.
Exactly. And the podcast jumps right into this by asking, how do we even define perfect age?
Right. Is it all about biology, like when we're the most fertile?
Or is it more about, you know,
Feeling ready?
feeling emotionally ready to be a parent?
Yeah.
And, of course, we can't forget about,
Finances.
finances. Diapers are expensive.
Yeah, they are.
And then there's that whole pressure from society.
Oh, yeah. Societal expectations definitely play a role.
For sure.
It's almost like a puzzle.
A big puzzle.
With tons of pieces, and each piece is weighted differently depending on your own circumstances.
Totally. And the podcast actually wants you to think about this.
It asks.
Yeah? What are the factors that matter most to you?
I know for some folks, it might be about having enough energy to keep up with little kids.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And that actually leads into the whole argument for younger parenthood.
Yeah, the podcast mentions that starting a family earlier could mean you're just more physically ready, you
Yeah.
know, for all those demands of like running after kids and stuff.
Huh?
And they brought up another point that I thought was interesting.
What's that?
They talked about having more years with your kids as they become adults.
Oh, yeah. Having more time with them as they grow up.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. But it makes me think about the other side of it, too. Like, the podcast also had some compelling arguments for waiting.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
They emphasize that waiting often means you've had time to build more stability, especially financially.
Oh, yeah.
They actually had a few tips. They suggested things like creating a budget and looking into potential childcare costs.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Hmm.
Because raising kids is not cheap.
No, it is not.
I mean, it's a huge commitment. Did they talk about anything else besides the financial side?
Definitely. They talked about how people who wait often have more life experience,
Right.
and that can translate into being a different kind of parent. They had this example about someone who went through some career setbacks,
Okay.
and they were able to use that experience to teach their kid about resilience.
Oh, that's such a good point. It makes me think about the emotional maturity that often comes with age.
Right.
It seems like the podcast is saying it's not just about age, it's about those experiences you've had.
I think that's a really powerful idea. It's not just about being older, it's about feeling prepared for all the ups and downs of parenthood.
For sure. And I bet that preparation looks different for everyone. I'm curious what else the podcast had to say about all the different experiences people have.
Well, they had a section about personal stories.
Oh, interesting.
They didn't share the full stories or anything, but they emphasized how individual circumstances and choices really shape people's experiences.
Yeah, you know, it's so easy to compare ourselves to others.
Oh, totally.
Like there's all this pressure to do things at a certain time.
Like hitting those milestones.
Yeah, and even when it comes to having kids, do you think the podcast addressed those external pressures at all?
They did. They brought up how cultural and societal norms really impact our decisions about family.
Okay.
They pointed out that some cultures actually encourage people to have kids young,
Right.
while others encourage people to wait until they're older.
It's amazing how much those expectations can affect us, isn't it?
It really is.
Did the podcast have any advice on how to deal with all that?
Well, they brought in a family planning expert,
Okay.
and they had a really interesting perspective on all of this.
What did they say?
They said that instead of trying to stick to some timeline that society dictates,
Right.
the perfect age is more about, personal readiness
Right.
and your individual circumstances.
So it sounds like there's no magic number.
Yeah, exactly. It all comes down to you, your readiness, your circumstances, and what's important to you.
That's a great point. As we head into part 2, I'm starting to really think about that whole idea of being ready and what it means to feel prepared to be a parent.
It is a complex question, isn't
It
it?
is. It's like emotions, life experiences, finances.
It's a lot to consider.
It really is.
Welcome back.
It's wild how much your circumstances and values really affect when you decide to start a family.
Absolutely.
It makes me think about that idea of personal readiness that the podcast kept coming back to. Did they get into what that means?
They did. They actually broke it down into different parts.
Right.
Like emotional readiness,
Okay.
financial preparedness,
Hmm.
and even how much support you have from friends and family. It's like a checklist, but every checklist is different,
Right, yeah.
depending on the person.
They talked about being financially ready in the first part, right? What else did they focus on?
So on the emotional side, they talked about things like really wanting to raise a kid
Mm-hmm.
and guide them and nurture them, or just having a stable life yourself.
Right.
For some folks, it might be about feeling good about their relationships
Okay.
or feeling confident in who they are.
It's like you need to have that solid base in your own life before you bring a kid into the mix.
Exactly.
Did they give any examples of what that could look like?
They talked about how some people might need to deal with stuff from their past.
Okay.
Like if they came from a difficult family before they feel ready to be a parent themselves. And some people might need to work through their anxieties
Right.
and insecurities.
Yeah, that's important because it shows how it's not just about how old you are.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what's going on inside
Right.
and feeling ready for the challenge of raising a child,
Definitely. They also mentioned having people you can lean on.
like a support system.
Yeah, whether it's a partner or family or friends, having those people around can make a huge difference in feeling prepared to be a parent.
That makes me think about all the different ways people raise kids around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some cultures, it's the whole family who helps out,
Yeah.
while in other cultures, it's more on the parents to do it all.
It's so interesting how that varies. And it relates to something else the podcast talked about,
What's that?
mature parenting.
Mature parenting.
Yeah, they talked about how older parents often think about things differently when it comes to discipline
Okay.
or communication, or even knowing when to let their kids learn from their mistakes.
I like that.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Those are things you probably learn over time,
Mm-hmm.
no matter when you have kids.
It's true. It goes back to that emotional maturity and self-awareness we were talking about.
Right.
Those qualities just develop over time and definitely affect how you approach parenting.
So it sounds like this whole personal readiness thing, it's not about hitting certain milestones.
It's not about checking off boxes.
Yeah, it's more about constantly learning and growing.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about looking at yourself and your relationships and your finances
Mm-hmm.
to see if having a child makes sense right now.
It's like finding that balance between how you feel inside and what's going on in your life.
Mm.
But did they talk about how things like societal expectations play into this too?
They did. They talked about how different cultures have unspoken rules about when it's the right time to have a family.
You know, it's something I've noticed. Like in some friend groups, it's all about having kids young.
Yeah, like there's a rush to
Right.
do it by a certain age.
But then other groups are all about focusing on careers and travel before even thinking about kids.
It really shows how much our environment can influence our decisions. The podcast pointed out how those cultural norms
Yeah.
can actually make people feel guilty or bad about themselves if they don't follow them.
That makes me think about how important it is to just be aware of those pressures
Mm.
and really listen to your own heart about what you want.
Absolutely. And I think the podcast would agree. They emphasize that it's about making choices that feel right for you,
Mhm.
not for everyone else.
I really like how they empower people to make their own decisions and forget those expectations.
Me too.
Speaking of being empowered,
Hmm.
did they say anything about what to do if your family or friends have opinions about your choices?
Ah, that's a good point. You know, I don't remember them talking about that specifically.
It's definitely something that comes up though, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When you're making a big decision like this, you want to talk to people you love
Mm-hmm.
and get their thoughts.
But sometimes, even if they mean well,
Yeah.
those opinions can make things harder.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's like you're trying to figure out what you want,
Mhm.
but then you've got society telling you what to do.
Right.
And then on top of that, you've got your loved ones weighing in.
It's a lot to manage. And I think that's where that personal readiness comes in even more.
Yeah.
It's about having that confidence to choose what feels right for you, even if it's not what everyone else thinks you should do.
It sounds like it's important to be open and honest with the people you love.
Yes.
Not to get them to agree with you,
Right.
but to help them understand why you're making the choices you're making.
Exactly. It reminds us that even though it's your personal journey,
Yeah.
you're not going through it alone. You have to think about your relationships too.
So as we wrap up this part, it seems like the big question has changed
Mm-hmm.
from, is there a perfect age?
To what does it mean to be personally ready?
Yeah, and being ready involves so many things.
Yeah.
Your emotions, your finances, who you have to support you.
It's about the whole picture.
Yeah.
You've got it. That's a great takeaway for anyone listening. It's not about a date on the calendar.
Right.
It's about feeling prepared
Mm-hmm.
and making sure your life circumstances match up with that.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We've talked about a lot already.
We have.
Emotions, finances,
Societal pressures.
even those personal stories from the podcast. There's so much to think about.
It really shows that this isn't a simple question.
Yep. Everyone's different.
Everyone's got their own path.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious what the podcast talked about in the end. Did they leave us with any big takeaways?
They did. They talked about something we haven't really touched on yet. They discussed how society is changing and how technology is advancing and how all that might affect family planning in the future.
Wow, that's a big topic.
It is.
What kind of changes are we talking about here?
Oh, think about how different things are now than they were even 10 years ago.
Right.
Our ideas about gender roles are different. People care more about work-life balance.
Yeah.
Even the definition of family is changing.
Yeah.
And the podcast pointed out how all of this could lead to people feeling less pressure to have kids at a certain time.
That makes sense. So instead of feeling like they have to follow a certain path, people might feel more free to make their own choices.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like all those expectations we talked about might start to disappear.
They might.
That's a really interesting thought. But the podcast also mentioned technology.
Right.
What do they have to say about that?
They talked about how things like fertility treatments give people more options about when to have kids. Like maybe if you know there are ways to help you get pregnant later on,
Mm-hmm.
that biological clock might not feel so loud.
That's a great point. Technology is giving us more control over our choices.
Mm.
Did they talk about any other types of technology?
They talked about remote work, which has become a big thing
Oh, yeah.
in the past few years. And they said that that flexibility could make it easier for people to have both a career and a family.
So maybe people would feel ready for kids sooner.
Maybe.
It sounds like we're entering a totally new world when it comes to family planning. Like we're not limited by the same old rules anymore.
That's a good way to put it. The podcast ended on a really positive note. They were saying that even though people will always wonder about the best time to have a family, the answer is always changing.
That's a really nice way to sum it up. It's not about finding the one right answer.
It's about knowing you're ready
Yeah,
and that your life is ready.
I think we covered it all. Emotions, finances, culture, technology.
I think so.
I hope this has helped you think about your own journey.
Me too.
And remember, there's no right or wrong answer. Listen to your gut and make choices that feel right for you. Until next time, keep on exploring.